Hello and welcome to Jessie Barrett Book Club. Today we are reviewing The Heart of the Crown, Henry VIII. This is part 2 of the review. The link to the first part is in the description below. Henry seems to find Anne Boleyn's complete lack of interest in him alluring, and he sets himself to win her through the chase. He also finds her unique and very French. He can sense intelligence lurking behind her dark eyes. Henry does a lot of soul searching and makes the hard decision that he must divorce Catherine of Aragon to get a legitimate heir, but he is annoyed by Wolsey's lack of enthusiasm for the project. Henry's decision to marry Anne Boleyn seems based on his grandfather's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville. He too will marry a commoner for love, and like Elizabeth Woodville, no doubt she will be fertile. I feel that is what is lurking at the back of Henry's mind when he is making these decisions. Henry falls out with Wolsey as soon as Wolsey ventures an opinion contrary to Henry's own about his divorce, and it is strange watching Henry's complete personality flip in regards to Wolsey and his mounting rage at Wolsey's lack of enthusiasm for the divorce. Henry fails to curb Anne Boleyn's haughty behaviour growing, even though he notices it, and it is a measure of his obsession with Anne and his insecurity that she will leave him at the drop of a hat if he tells her to stop being so snobby. I will never fully understand Catherine of Aragon's refusal to bow out gracefully. I am with Henry here. She could have saved everyone a lot of pain. The court case in Blackfriars makes Henry very embarrassed, and not least because it fails to grant him his wish for a divorce, and he is an embarrassed monarch, which is an angry monarch, which is a dangerous thing. Henry's fallout with Wolsey after the court case in Blackfriars is gradual, but it is interesting seeing Henry taking charge and ruling his kingdom on his own for the first time. Finally, in his late 30s, he is growing up. Cromwell's rise to power is much more gradual than Wolsey's, as Henry is actually taking more of an interest in his own affairs than he did when he was in his teens and early 20s, even his late 20s and early 30s. Wolsey's death is very sad, and I felt for Henry when George Cavendish delivers Wolsey's final rebuke about how God wouldn't have given him up in his grey hairs. I didn't realise Henry's doubts about Anne Boleyn's chastity ran so deep. Given this context, Anne's sudden fall from grace is much more understandable. Anne and Henry's first sexual experience together seems to have been a letdown for them both. Henry finds Anne skinny, and her lack of enthusiasm for him, which we know from her POV in The King's Obsession, is somewhat apparent, though I think Henry was very out of practice as he hadn't had sex in 7 years. Then we get the blowjob scene, and I was surprised by how prudish Henry really was, never having experienced such a thing. I think if he had been a little bit more sexually adventurous, he and Anne may have had more longevity. Henry's adoration and care for pregnant Anne is so cute, and it feels very different to the way he behaved with Catherine of Aragon to me. Does he love Anne more, or is it just the fact he is really desperate for a son at this point? The tide of Henry's affection really starts to turn once Anne Boleyn has Elizabeth, and then miscarries a boy. Henry acts like a spoilt kid who didn't get his Christmas present, and is openly unfaithful to Anne, more so than normal, and says very hurtful things to her. Henry knows he is acting badly towards Anne, but blames her for being over-prideful, which is such bullshit. Henry's excommunication by the new pope gives him some worry, but he blames Pope Clement for making him break with Rome by not granting him a divorce. Does anybody else notice a pattern of blame emerging here? Is it at this point in the book that I started to wonder, page 388 of 500, 1795 how on earth Alison Weir was going to fit everything else in. Henry loves his children, but doesn't pay them overly much personal attention, and I find that very disappointing. I wanted some good Henry versus Mary disagreement POVs. Then we get the Thomas More plot, which is dull because Thomas More is dull, and I shall not be discussing it because I don't care to. Anne loses 2 more boys, and Henry is incredibly unfeeling towards her. It actually hurts my heart seeing him discard her so quickly. I get the fact he feels he is running out of time to have a son, but Anne is still a person that he apparently was madly in love with. Anne has also fallen out with Cromwell by this point and her uncle Howard, and Henry's dislike for her is now isolating her within the court. Enter Jane Seymour. I was hoping for an arrow through the heart moment, as I really enjoyed The Haunted Queen about Jane Seymour, but that didn't happen. Instead, Henry seems to adore the fact Jane is quiet, and he reminds him of his mother, as he spills out his heart to her comfortable ear. Henry also seems to crave Jane's large family dynamic. I think at this point in the book, with the death of his sister Mary, he is craving some sense of family. Henry falls from his horse, and it wasn't as dramatic as I was hoping this scene would be, but the scene where Anne Boleyn finds Jane Seymour sitting on Henry's lap made up for that tenfold. I was also hoping for a Jane and Henry sex scene. I was disappointed by the lack of it. Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn both got sex scenes, so I felt let down by the fact Jane didn't get one. At this point in the story, I get the strong feeling that if Anne Boleyn had fallen pregnant again, none of this would have played out the way it did. True, Henry had little love left for Anne, but he did want to be seen as being in the right when it came to the Empire. I feel if Chapuis had not been so rude to Anne at Mass and therefore annoyed Henry, who then boxed Cromwell's ears, Cromwell would not have started plotting against Anne so quickly. Henry does want an annulment from Anne, but his prudish nature played straight into Cromwell's hands, as the evidence of adultery against Anne was far too much for prudish Henry to even contemplate. It's hard to believe Henry has sat on the information about Anne's supposed adultery for days until the May Day tournament without ever mentioning it to poor Anne. She was completely blindsided. Henry's proposal to Jane was in a comforting vein. Henry sees Jane as safe and quiet, everything Anne is not. After Anne Boleyn's arrest, Henry is in a daze of hurt ego, but he does cry when he hears the cannons roar Anne's execution. He cannot put the pieces together of the girl he loved, who was so against giving herself to him before marriage, and the whore he now thinks her, probably because the pieces don't fit. They were just invented by Cromwell. This is the end of part 2 of this review of Henry VIII, The Heart of the Crown. I will see you guys next week for part 3. Until next time, don't lose your heads. Bye!